and welcome to Australia Unshackled. My name's Catherine.
And I'm Glenn.
And we will be your hosts, as per normal. And the reason we're having a show today is because the British Empire has decided to attack the Murray Darling Basin. Now, this isn't just subject to the Murray Darling Basin, this is subject to the whole country because this is the sovereignty of the nation that we're talking about. When you're talking about food security and the Murray Darling Basin feeds 60 million people, you're talking about national security. Now, the Murray Darling Basin Authority had to write a guide, and that guide was based on the 2007 Border Act, which the Liberal government, the Howard Liberal government, passed just before they had to go up for another election. And this was based on human beings being put behind the environment. So the environment is number one. And what we're talking about with this Murray Darling Basin fight is that the government is threatening to take water off the farmers, put it out to sea through environmental flows to save the rivers. Not that the rivers die if they don't have water. We'll put that there right now. But you're talking about, if this happens, total genocide and decimation of a nation. Not to mention, the national security and national sovereignty of this nation. Now, who's the enemy? And this is what we want to talk about, doesn't it, Glenn?
Yeah, with the Citizens Electoral Council, we've been in a mobilisation since the very beginning of this year, calling everyone in the basin, every institution, councillors, and introducing them to this bigger picture, because it's not just a question of the basin, as Kat was saying, but the British Empire. And this new citizen, we've produced 500,000 copies of that, and within it is a special report that we've been compiling for some time, titled Land Clearance in the Murray Darling Basin, British Genocide in the 21st Century. And so that's the background for what we're doing. A lot more of the information is in that. In this show, we're not going to cover every and spec.
We'll be here forever.
That's something to know and to order just before we get into the...
Well, on a side note to that, which is actually a very important side note, which gives you a real picture and paints a very broad brushstroke. The WWF, a lot of people don't know who that's founded by. And you ask people on the street when you're at a table talking to people and just, down the street talking, they don't know who founded the WWF. Now, who founded the WWF? Prince Philip. Okay, what does Prince Philip believe? Prince Philip believes that we're overpopulated, we have finite resources, and he'd like to come back as a deadly virus if he's reincarnated. Now, you look at the WWF in that context, and them working in cahoots with the Ramsar Convention. Now, what's the Ramsar Convention? The Ramsar Convention is a treaty written up, it's a worldwide treaty, and if you go onto their website, you can actually look at all these wetlands that have been locked up so you can't develop upon them. And it's basically to lock up the land and the wetlands, which is in context of the land clearance in the Murray Darling Basin, British genocide in the 21st century, which this new citizen goes through on page 3. And what it's doing is it's in cahoots. The Ramsar Convention with the WWF is in cahoots with the Murray Darling Basin Water Act, which was in 2007.
Yeah, they helped write it. As we're beginning
to uncover. In cahoots with the WWF.
That, these environmentalist groups wrote this, helped Turnbull and these guys write the legislation, which now is systematically destroying our food bowl. Because
the Murray Darling Basin Authority, which you had all these meetings just last year, and you had a huge mass strike based on that. Now the Water Authority, they had to write their guide, the Murray Darling Basin Guide, based on this Water Act. Now, if these Liberals want to say that the Act is not the issue, which we'll get into in a minute, it's absolute crap. Because the Water Act is exactly the issue from the standpoint that we're fighting the British Empire, and the British Empire is in cahoots with its takedown of the Murray Darling Basin and the nation itself. So if you want to eat food, you've got to know who your enemy is. And we stipulate that very well in the New Citizen. We give you the tools to be able to fight it. And we are fighting a war on the British Empire. And if you don't think so, we'll do your research.
Yep, and there's been a lot of good arguments with many people on this question, because it really is the fundamental question. If you don't know who your enemy is, how are you ever going to win a war?
Exactly. And, you've got this whole thing now where the mass strike happened, people reacted, the government's like, oh crap, we don't know what to do, we're going to have an inquiry on an inquiry. So we're going to have a commission on a commission. It's to look at the socio-economics of the basin, basically. So let's actually have a look at whether or not, or how much it's going to affect the Murray Darling Basin based on socio-economics. It doesn't take a rocket scientist, it's going to kill them. So, it doesn't take an inquiry on an inquiry, because the inquiry's already been done. It's called the Marsden-Jacobs report. That's a socio-economic report, which basically outlined the fact that it's going to decimate farms.
Yeah, just to add, is also the Ritzer report, which was compiled by a man, Adrian Ritzer, for the Murray Darling Basin Authority, where he basically lays out that in response to even the release of the guide to the plan, not even the plan itself, but the guide to the plan is enough to trigger in these banks what are called materially adverse events.
And this is in cahoots with the Murray Darling Basin Authority.
Yeah, they've been in back channel, behind the doors.
Cooperating.
Yeah, discussions on it, as Mike Taylor even admitted. And what does this report say? The Ritzer report goes through the fact that any town in the basin with less than 25,000 people, which is most of these places,
disgusting,
including the biggest towns such as Griffith and Collyamberley, Mildura, Deniliquin and others, that under this guide, these towns are considered unviable, which means the banks will start to call in loans en masse, bankrupting farmers, driving farmers off the land, which has a very obvious outcome: less food and genocide. Which means, why do you need to have an inquiry or a commission on a commission?
Exactly.
Which is what you see with Tony Windsor's these meetings in the basin at the moment.
Well, you can get those quotes. We can give them to you. We've also got, if you look at this one here, we've been getting this out en masse. So if you actually want to know the point by point of how the government is in cahoots with this destruction of the nation, it's right here. So, yeah, I mean, this proves that it is a dog and pony show. The whole commission's a dog and pony show. Pat people on the head to let them emotionally vent their rage, but there's going to be nothing done about it. Because, as was stipulated after the Griffith meeting on Tuesday last week, the Area News, which is a paper in the Griffith area, they reported that Tony Windsor, he gave an interview, he said the changing of the Water Act was simply a distraction from the main game. So what is the main game, Tony? He says, this is what Tony says, and I quote, "I think there is too much emphasis on us revisiting the Water Act. The substantive issues of river health, river management, icon sites, and all those things are irrespective of how the Water Act is constructed." Well, the Water Act is actually based on human beings being put after the environment. So the environment comes first. And if you're in cahoots with the WWF and the Ramsar Convention, which is what the Water Act is in cahoots with, by saying that the Water Act is not the issue, well, Tony, do you wear British underpants?
Yeah.
Because if you're willing to defend the Water Act based on the fact that this is a British Empire legislation, basically, in not so many words, and you're willing to support it and say it's not the issue, well, what is the issue, Tony? Because this is British and you're supporting it.
Yeah, it sounds like Tony's working for the Windsors.
Oh, yeah. His name suits what he's fighting for. So, and this is what we've got to get through to people. And this is why this new citizen is so crucial and so important. And this is why people actually getting activated, joining our fight, because we're the only ones fighting this, is so damn crucial. Because we're going to give you the tools to fight. Now, you gave a submission to the inquiry, Glenn?
Yeah, on behalf of the Citizens Electoral Council at the Griffith meeting, prior to...
Did Tony Windsor react to what you were saying?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's...
And other people.
Of course. I mean, the question is... just to at these meetings, the overwhelming point that's being made is that the Water Act is the issue, that this is what's setting up the whole problem in the first place, and everyone was telling them that, telling Tony that. And
they just lack to really push fully onto what the issue is.
So yeah,
which is why we're so important.
Yeah, we got to put on the table the Citizens Electoral Council's position and really help support these farmers coming out, not pulling their punches. So here's the video.
Hey, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to try and do we're going to try to do with time what these great farmers here do with water. I'm going to take 5 minutes and try to squeeze it in 3. My name is Tony Windsor, I'm from Melbourne. I'm a representative of the Citizens Electoral Council, an independent political party, which represents thousands of farmers and concerned citizens across the country. I have 4 points I want to make. Number 1. The entire so-called science of ecosystems, of river health, and of wetlands, on which this basin reform is based, is just plain quackery. It has no more reality to it than the fraud of so-called climate change, which is now widely discredited. Any honest duck would be ashamed of this wetlands nonsense. Number 2. As is acknowledged by everyone concerned, this entire process of cutting water to agriculture in the basin has been 100% directed by a supranational body, the Ramsar Convention on Wetlands. Ramsar was founded by and is just a front for the world's 2 major environmental lobbies, the Worldwide Fund for Nature and the International Union for the Conservation of Nature and Natural Resources, the IUCN. Both of these are provably British imperial bodies dedicated to the preservation of the still existing British Empire and to the looting and destruction of sovereign nations, in this case our great nation of Australia. Number 3, all environmentalism in the post-World War II period was founded by leading figures of the British Eugenics Society and its various fronts. Thus, the openly stated purpose of the WWF and the IUCN and their clones here in Australia, such as the Australian Conservation Foundation and the Wentworth Group of concerned scientists, is so-called population reduction. That is, namely genocide. That is the purpose of these so-called water reforms in the basin. Number 4. It is the Citizens Electoral Council's view that all the so-called science premised on arguments of conserving ecosystems in a natural state, independent of human activity, as is pushed under Ramsar and under the environmental terms of the Water Act, is both impossible and destructive. Rather, the Citizens Electoral Council are of the firm conviction, based on real science, that human beings, through their natural intervention into the biosphere, as is exemplified through the construction of dams and other water irrigation, can improve the biosphere, allowing it to support more and more life. Contrary to the environmentalist ideology, human creativity can improve nature where nature itself never could. While we have not yet mastered the prevention of droughts or floods, we can certainly mitigate them without human creativity. In light of this, Mr. Chairman, I, on behalf of the Citizens Electoral Council, recommend the following several actions be taken by all the committee members of this inquiry and the members of the Australian Parliament. First, repeal the 2007 Water Act. Second, put in place protective measures for our farmers and our homeowners with a farm debt moratorium, as we have composed in draft legislation called the Productive Industries and Farms Domestic Debt Moratorium Amelioration and Restructuring Bill 94.
Then we might ask if you...
And the Homeowners and Bank Protection Bill 2008. I have these here for you to take. To conclude, Mr. Chairman, I would like to conclude with a quote from New South Wales Premier Jack Lang. The one God-given, inalienable right of man is the right to live. If man or woman is denied the right to work, they still retain the right to live. The government that fails to realise that has forfeited the right to exist. Thank you.
Yes. So, you heard the submission. Now, the thing is, we should be fighting, and any less fighting on what Glenn just said in his submission to the inquiry, and there's a little bit more which I'll go into, is submitting to the Empire. And, you know, if we don't fight this thing, yours and my head is on the chopping block. And so this is war, especially when it involves food. So the solution, because Glenn didn't get to mention all the solutions, what are they, Glenn?
Well, obviously, as I was mentioning there, nothing less than the repeal of the Water Act of 2007 as number one. And of course, number two, in light of the economic breakdown crisis, the farmers in drought, flood, and this plan, we need to have a farm debt moratorium and protection for homeowners. And we've got the legislation for that. We've written it up over many years and proposed that to government. So that's ready to go.
They know it exists. They just don't have the intention.
And
You got to make them have the intention. We got to change these things through ideas.
Mm-hmm. And of course, what I didn't have a chance to mention there, but the most critical of our recovery policy is we need to return to a national government-owned bank like the original Commonwealth Bank, because then we can start to issue credit at low interests over long term for rebuilding our farms, our technology, infrastructure, and of course we can then put on the table optimistic projects for long-term development, large infrastructure programs like the Clarence River Scheme and the Bradfield Scheme.
Well, it's funny because we're spending all this money on the Murray Darling Basin Authority, not to mention after the authority, the inquiry on the inquiry, which is this Murray Darling Basin Inquiry Commission. We're spending millions of dollars, right? Why isn't it that we're actually spending millions of dollars and having inquiries on how we can actually develop the country rather than shut it down? It's a bit of a paradox, isn't it? Because it's simple. We've done the work. We've done all the maps. We've mapped it out. We're trying to show different individuals. Some people like it, or some people want it, some people don't. But they need to get educated, because if we don't do it, it's their heads on the chopping block.
Right.
And that's one of the solutions.
Yeah. And I think that's where we'll leave it. I mean, the key thing is join our movement.
Join us.
And activate, organise. We've got to defeat the British Empire.
Yeah, agitate.
So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
See you later.